Okay, so we're continuing our topics. We've gone through all the theories and all that stuff. And Elijah brought up a question about, is it ethical to allow someone to believe a lie or something that isn't true? Or should we challenge that even if they're afraid that what we're claiming is true is going to cause them pain? Is that close enough?
So the truth would be setting them free from pain, but they don't think it's true, so they keep on believing the lie, and it causes them distress.
Sure.
You know?
So yeah, the problem of course is, and I've actually had several Muslims quote, I think it's Surah 631 at me, and this passage in Fred's paraphrase of the Quran is, if there is a dispute amongst you about truth, bring your wives, your children, all come together and make your proclamation before Allah, and may God strike down those who are liars. And I'm just thinking, I'm not sure why Muslims are quoting that at me, but I responded to one of them and said, but the problem is people don't know they're liars. And that's, I think, the point you were getting at. They really believe their version or their narrative is the truth, even though other people like that Joe Harry window, everyone else may be saying, can't you see how your beliefs are hurting or harming you? We can only work with what we believe is true within us, but I would hope with gentleness and love and compassion, we would want to speak that truth that we believe into other people's lives. But I think we have to keep a type of humility as well, realizing what we think is capital T truth may just be part of our perspective as well. And so I'm really cautious about telling people, this is the capital T absolute truth, but I may more point out, do you see how your view of reality or other people or the situation is causing you harm and duress and pain, and maybe give them some other ways to look at it. But because it's a belief, you can't reason someone out or threaten someone out of a belief. That has to change inside of them. And so I'm always an advocate of confronting lies, but I think gentleness, I know we can get all riled, especially if we see the lies hurting people we care about or love, but yeah, you can see the problem if we put this into the realm of theology or politics or socioeconomic issues.
Well, that's what I found interesting, because in like one case, the truth should always be coming out, and it's important. But then it's like that in the practical sense, it kind of starts to break down. It'd be better if we had like a concrete example.
Well, if you get one, let's do it. But what I want to talk about today, while I'm waiting for you guys to send me your contemporary dilemmas, is these are two big fields. We could do a whole class on either of these. And these are biotech or biomedical issues. And remember what I was telling you about philosophy and ethics. It's like that eye of Sauron. And now that we have all these theories and tools and what ethics are and how to make these value judgments, we can turn that eye onto anything. Like all of your different majors, we have business ethics, we have medical ethics, we have counseling psychology ethics, we have ethics in education. So there's sports ethics, kinesiology ethics, all of these sorts of things. And you can see how people could use any of those different theories and apply it into their discipline. What I'm hoping you'll do is to have this Holy Spirit ethic, this asking God what to do, and going through that process. I was sharing with you in part 3 of my book, I wanted to apply that to some of these biotech or biomedical issues. Back when I was younger, and I don't know, I guess I was content spending all my free time grading papers. In addition to making you do 2 to 3 page critiques of 5 of the 9 theories, I made everyone in the class write a 10 to 20 page ethical term paper where they had to pick a topic. And I'm so glad I did that. I'm so glad I'm not doing it now, and I'm sure many of you are too. But I learned so much from my students' papers, like things I just was brought up thinking were wrong or immoral, because I made them do it like that formal critique. They would have to objectively state what the issue was, why it was a dilemma. Then they would have to give me perspectives from the pro side of it. And then they would have to give me at least 5 cons to the issue. And then they would have to sort out how they would respond in that situation. And so when we talk about biotech, that could be everything like GMO foods, genetically modified organisms, which has become really big. In the United States, for the most part, you don't even have to label it. You could be eating food that is not what it appears to be. And in Europe, they're a lot stricter. In fact, they ban a lot of US products because they have different purity laws or their version of the FDA. In fact, they call a lot of American GMO foods, it's part of why we can produce so much food, because we have people like Monsanto and others. We have 5 corporations that control something like 80% of the seeds in this country. That's kind of scary if you're into conspiracy theories. Go ahead, Jill.
Oh, I saw something, I was like reading an article on it, and it said that European countries that they ban certain foods because they have, like the government pays for their healthcare. And so they don't want people to get sick, and they don't want them to have problems, whereas here in America, they want you to get sick, and they want you to have problems, so they're not banning certain things. Like it was the theory that they're not banning certain things on food that other countries do, because, yeah, they're making money off.
Well, that is horribly cynical, and I hope that's not true, but it sounds true as you say it, unfortunately.
Go back like 120 years before the FDA, and you'd be like, oh, actually, they do kind of care about our health, because holy cow, the stuff they would put in our food.
That's true. It's got way better.
Straight up poisonous stuff. They're like, yeah, we know this will probably kill them, but it's cheap.
But do they care about our health to the degree that they have to eat too, so they care about their own health? But there's some stuff we want other people to get sick too, so what's the deadline?
They know what to eat,
Right, yeah.
so they don't be buying McDonald's and stuff.
Well, and a lot of the stuff they put in food keeps you like addicted to it, or makes you eat too much, makes you more.
Or you have self-control. I've eaten everything that you're talking about. I've never had addicted to it. I'm addicted to McDonald's.
It's also a lot of like how you grew up.
It's a lot of how you grew up. I grew up eating dumb all the time, and I
Right, so, and then this goes back to the social determinants. People of lower oppressed economic locations have no choice but to eat certain food.
Especially since like healthier food.
It costs more, yeah.
Okay, so all those things you're talking about, the disparity, who can afford good, clean food, the cheapness of fast food, junk food, all these different disparities we have. There we go. And so here, these are just some of the things that could come under biotech. And with our unlocking of the genome, not just the human genome, but of a lot of the plants and animals that we have domesticated or used. See, in the past, if you wanted to get a new type of like apple or vegetable or breed of cow or something like that, you would selectively pick its parents for the traits you wanted, like if you wanted a dairy cow or a meat cow or a cow for leather or whatever. And you would keep selecting until you got those traits you wanted. That's how we got everything from toy horses that are the size of a medium dog to Clydesdales, which are over their shoulder is higher than my head. And you're just like, oh, these are all horses? And that was done by humans selectively breeding. If you want to go smaller, you breed runts with runts and you keep getting the genetic drift smaller. And if you want bigger, you do it the other way. And then for other traits. Now with our unlocking the genome, we don't have to do it that way. We can actually go into the DNA strands and cut out, almost like those old Super 8 movies where you would splice out frames and then you could put in new frames to change the DNA. So you're not having to wait generations. You could change something in the lab in one generation.
They've done that with like real animals.
Oh, yes,
But they can do it.
yes. And they've also spliced like things like broccoli and cauliflower together. And I'm not talking about cross-pollinating, I'm talking about actually going into the genetic code and inserting, they've even done they've put like human genes into pork products. They've put the luminescence of like fireflies into tobacco to make like glowing tobacco. They were trying to do it with Christmas trees, so you could buy like a luminescent tree, like with a faint, I've never seen them on the market, it was probably too expensive, but that kind of stuff. Now they're testing like, what do they call it, Incredible Burgers or Wonder Meat, or that's made from plants. I mean, the nice thing is you don't have to kill an animal to eat a burger, but how healthy are those plant burgers, right? I mean, because they're so processed, they've done so much to give them the taste and texture and smell of meat, but it's not meat. But we can even grow meat cells, muscle cells in vats. So it's possible in the future, we'll be getting our meat from laboratories, not from farms. Right? So it's weird, it's a brave new world in a lot of ways. And the other thing we have to deal with is if you're trying to approach this from a Christian perspective, there ain't no chapters and verses on this stuff. You can't go into Leviticus and it says, thou shalt not clone a plant or animal or human in its own likeness. There's no verse like that. There's no verse that says you can't CRISPR or gene splice certain plants. There's nothing that says you can't use artificial pesticides or fertilizers. So the best we can do is extrapolate from our understanding of God as creator and his world and how he would have us treat it and ourselves. But now we're extrapolating. We're not just having like proof text or thus saith the Lord. Questions? So yeah, go ahead.
I feel like, aren't there verses that say that like you shouldn't try to play God or like be God yourself? Like, and I feel like creating life, like how far do you take it? Because I mean, I feel like combining things is different than like cloning a person, or like where you have like designer babies where you can pick what your kid looks like, or.
So that's like the bad side, but what about the good side of that? Oh,
Yeah.
my kid, I have a genetic disease that's probably gonna limit my kid's lifespan 20 years, but now we can go in there and take that out, and now they'll live a full happy life. We're not trying to change their eye color, we're trying to save them.
Can they take it out, or don't they just like terminate the pregnancy? Like,
No,
isn't it?
they're trying to get to the
more
point of
like-
CRISPR, like during the embryonic stage, they can mutate the DNA when it's early, and it'll keep reproducing itself, so that way that's what the baby becomes. That is the baby. We are a combination of, Y chromosome, X chromosome, or Y.
Because I've heard
So
too, taking that cell can create side effects.
But that's still.
Well, they don't know yet, that's why it's highly illegal, right?
They're trying to control when you live and you die, how you're healthy.
Okay, so here are some of the biomedical issues, everything from blood transfusion, organ transplants, but it gets even more involved, right? Now that we have the genome, because we can use CRISPR on humans as well.
Well, China did that to 2 babies.
Oh, did they?
Yes, super illegal, and even they were like, excuse us. So,
But
it was
for-
like a crazy scientist, you can look it up, I don't know what happened to the kids, they're like a few years old now, a couple years ago, but highly illegal.
Okay, let me keep.
All right, sorry.
2 of my nephews have cystic fibrosis, which is a genetic disorder, which it has a lot of side effects, but one of them is it makes you overproduce like mucus and it damages your lungs. They also have trouble with digestion. But as they're learning more about the human genome, if they can get to a point to say, oh, it is this and this and this gene that are causing the body to react that way, they could actually go in, if you just imagine having like a strand like this of different genes, and you just go in and you remove the damaged gene, and then you take one from a healthy line and you cut this out and you simply insert that in. And then, but you have to do that at early stages of development because that's going to be in every nucleus of every cell of the body. So, and we talked about that a little about like gender reorientation therapies or surgeries. You can do superficial things. Well, superficial, that's the wrong word. You can do like hormone therapies and things like that, but at the cellular level, these people are still going to be primarily XX or XY, even though you might be able to change, you know, breast or the appearance of genitalia or these other things. At a cellular level, you would have to do that at a really young age and do it when it had only split maybe 4, 8, 12 times and go in and fix each of those because that is going to spread to the whole body. Okay, so it's amazing technology and it's right around the corner, but you know, there was a really good movie. It's probably a 90s movie called Gattaca. And it was using those letters from because these are proteins. There's only 4 proteins, G, A, T, C, that all, I believe all life forms are made from on the planet. There's hundreds of proteins, but all life forms come from those 4 and how they're arranged in different patterns. And so the movie took that, and it was supposed to be a futuristic movie, but we're already there. And basically, when you wanted to have a child, you would go in and you would talk to your gene therapist. They would look at the man and the woman's genome, and then they would collect eggs from the woman, sperm from the man, and they would, like in vitro, fertilize these eggs from the parents, but they would choose the best of. Okay, so the idea was, we're going to screen out all the damaged traits, tendencies towards alcoholism, being bald, different diseases, cystic fibrosis, all of that. So it's still your child, but it's like the best possible child you and your spouse could have produced. So, like you could have tried 100 times to get one child this good. Go ahead.
Okay, so this seems to be motivated to create an elite human race free from sickness, damage, disease, early death, so on and so on.
Yes.
And it's only available for those who can afford it, correct?
Well, at the moment, sure.
Which means it's not for everybody. So if you see how it's kind of predatory, it's exclusive.
Sure, but healthcare's like that anyways.
Well, I still would disagree with that too, though, yeah, but I would disagree with that anyway. So from that standpoint, it seems like humans are trying to say, well, there's death, and how can we do our best without acknowledging sin in the gospel so that we can continue to live long? And this happens to only be for the elite few.
Well,
So theologically, that would be wrong.
well, no, so first, I can't agree with the elite few, because again, it's like anything we have, oh, don't heal anybody, because only a few people can get healed, because.
Well, that's still elite few.
Life is about the elite few, unfortunately.
On what ground? I'm talking theology.
Okay, I want to keep moving on this topic instead of getting off on we can do a class issue topic later, but back to this movie Gattaca. So basically this idea is we're using technology to produce the best humans possible because we need the best humans possible. Whenever someone is born subpar whether that's mentally, physically. It's a drain on the entire community. And this was kind of like a sci-fi where they were starting to send rockets into space, and they needed really durable, smart, hardy humans. They couldn't send a human like me or your typical average Joe or Jane. They needed like the super athletes, the super brains, the super calm personalities. So they're literally like breeding people for these roles. And now it's not prejudice based on race or gender or religion. It's prejudice based on your genome. Like how good is your genome compared to other people? And that's how you get advancement and job. I mean, you could just give them a saliva test for your interview.
Isn't there a book like that, where it's like the classes of people?
Brave New
Maybe
World.
Brave New World.
Yeah. Yeah, and that one, it's a very similar theme where society realizes we want our worker people, we want like our innovators or our police enforcers, and then the ruling class, almost like a beehive. So you got your queen, your soldiers, and your workers. And that's what Brave New World was about. And yeah, the benefits, of course, are with this technology, we could heal lots of diseases and these sorts of things. But on the flyer of that movie, it said, there is no gene for the human spirit. And so what they were pitting was, you could have these people with superior genomes, but if they didn't have the will or desire to use that, who cares if you have a great vehicle if you don't want to drive it? And other people may really want to do something with their lives, but they don't have such a great physical body or vehicle, but they were able to overcome through their own determination and will and drive what these superior, genetically superior humans couldn't do. So I love the theme and the message of the movie, but the flip side was, wow, why wouldn't you want to correct a genetic birth defect in your child? Let me give you an example. As this technology continues, and we know what causes Down syndrome, it's an extra chromosome. So if we were able to detect Down syndrome early enough, you could go in and remove that. This is theoretical at this point. No one's done this yet, but you could theoretically go in and remove that extra chromosome, and then that child would develop within the normal range of human development. And my question I like to ask my students is, would you do that for your child? Or would you be like, no, that's playing God. I'm gonna take the hand God dealt me.
I think it's different, like doing that, it's still, you're not like eliminating your child because they're not the superior one, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's.
Right, you're not
like,
you're not
lesser
killing them.
standard of it. Yeah, versus like saying we need to have only the most superior people. Like, I see how it goes to that extent, and I feel like that's true of a lot of things, like in certain situations, I agree with it, but then when you take it to apply to everything.
Yeah, go ahead, Elijah.
I feel like it kind of goes into like this one thing that Joel said, that people would totally take this to an extreme, like, of course, but like that middle ground of, should people use something for evil, or is the thing itself evil? I'm on the thing, the thing itself is not evil at all. It's God gave us minds to develop to make us more like Him. We can understand Him more by understanding His greater mind. But yeah, like the Down syndrome, of course you want your kid not to have to live with that, because one, it causes emotional trauma throughout the whole life, because not everybody's nice to them. Yes, some people might do it because they're like, oh, maybe it's the same thing. Like, no, but why wouldn't you get your kid a life-saving vaccine or go into medicine? You have the people that we're just gonna pray in faith and their kid dies. I'm like, that's when you killed your kid. Like, no, God doesn't say ignore all science and doctors. If God made science, like it's that the deal. So
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, that was very good. And when we pull out that you're playing God argument, I just want to remind people, every time you make a choice, whether it's to take aspirin or to get a cast on your arm or to seek some kind of medication, in a sense, you're playing God. You're using your will to make decisions that are going to affect your life. And I'm not saying your will can overthrow the sovereignty or plan or purpose of God, but we play God like little g gods all the day long as we're navigating, making choices that have real consequences. And so I think we have to be careful of throwing the you're playing God card out, because look at this list on the board again, with some of these issues. When people first came up with the idea of blood transfusions, most Christians thought that was the most demonic thing they ever heard of. And because the life is in the blood, and how, if you give your blood to someone else, are you like putting your soul into their body? I mean, people had really interesting ideas about blood. In fact, a lot of in the medieval period and even in the Enlightenment, some of our founding fathers, when you would get sick, people assumed it's because you had evil spirits in your body, and they would bloodlet you to try to get the bad spirits to come out with your blood. So here are people that are already weak and struggling, and then the medical wisdom of the day was to bloodlet them, and many of them died because of blood loss, not even from the disease that was afflicting them. And so science, culture, knowledge does have an effect on our ethics, morality. And as people began to not think so much in terms of life is in the blood in a literal spiritual sense, but more as like a biological, mechanical sense, blood transfusions became commonplace. And I don't know any conservative evangelical Christians personally today that would be opposed to blood transfusions. But 100 years ago, that would have been the exception. And then the same thing happened when organ transplants first started. People were like, no, that's playing God. We can't do that, etc. But it keeps going, right? Stem cell research, cloning, surrogacy. And just because something's new doesn't necessarily mean it's of the devil. And so that's what we have to kind of navigate. How can we use this technology or human reason applied without violating how God wants us to live? And so what I'm asking you to think about, thinking about your knowledge of the scriptures, are there any like general principles we can use as guidelines? Or is this all just so new that we don't have any guidance?
I would start with like, what's our great commandments to love one another? So if you're doing one of these things out of love, so like, okay, we're taking away a harmful genome, you know, that's like a pretty big pro, like, hey, you're not gonna have to deal with lifelong pain forever because we can fix it. That's like one positive.
Sure, I love it. And can I just put fruit of the spirit instead of just love? I'll put love too. But you can have like love, care, compassion, all those great virtues. And yeah, I would definitely ask, why are we doing this? What's the intention? What are we hoping to accomplish? And are we doing it out of fear? Are we doing it out of control, manipulation, power, greed? Or are we doing this out of compassion, love, care, healing, help? And that's where some Christian ethicists like Geisler and others would be perfectly fine with what they would call reparative therapies. Like if you're a burn victim, it's perfectly fine for you to go in and have plastic surgery and get skin that was grown in a vat put onto your body, because he would see it as you're repairing or restoring something that had been broken or lost. But what if someone doesn't like their nose or their cheekbones or their ears? Are they allowed to go in and get those things changed? Or is that wrong because that's now vanity or pride or ego? But for some people, they really can't handle the way they look. And if we have the technology to change it, isn't that okay? So I'm obviously a deontologist. I'm much more interested in the intention than the outcomes, although I care about outcomes. But I think it's important to think about our intentions. And if someone wants rhinoplasty or breast implants or calf implants or whatever they want to enhance their appearance, is that really any less violating of God's, how he made us, than people who get their teeth worked on or get their hair done or colored or dyed or all those things? And you might say, come on, Black, we're dyeing your hair and getting a nose job are two completely different categories. Maybe, but only in like extreme. You're still like not content with what you have, and you're going in to try to make it how you want it. But it is, I guess it comes down to the question, whose vehicle is it? Is this God's vehicle? Is it your vehicle? Is it a shared vehicle? Do you get say on how you're going to roll in this vehicle? I think we do. How we adorn it, how we take care of it, how we feed it, how we provide medical care for it. I think we do have an obligation to take care of this temple of the Holy Spirit. But at the same time, I'm not going to be telling people like, no, if you get a nose job or a boob job or whatever, liposuction, you're in rebellion against God and you're just vain and an egomaniac, because I kind of think that's between them and Jesus.
I mean, it's where it gets really hard and stuff. I mean, because it's like, on the simple side, yeah, like, do we care that, you know, somebody cuts his hair that way and I cut my hair this way? We're both being vain to do one style or hair or, you know, whatnot.
I'm going to give you 2 minutes to roll without me. Keep
Oh,
going.
dear, no, can't leave us alone. I mean, like, where is that line? We love to do like some kind of hedge argument. You showed like some people have a hedge here, some people have a hedge here, some people have a hedge here, but is there like an actual like a hard line? Like, oh no, that's against scriptural teaching versus personal interpretation.
A lot of it would depend on the person's heart and what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's what it's like intention, like,
Where do we get
yeah,
that?
it comes back to like, are you putting it above God? Like, are you gonna put more value in that, whatever it is, let's say you do a job, right, you put more value in that than you're gonna like in God?
What does that mean? Put more value? Are you idolizing it? Like,
Yeah.
if you're not idolizing it, you're just like, yeah, I like this. Oh, but he doesn't tell me not to, so why not?
Like, make things like there's nothing wrong with having nice clothes, but if you feel like I'm not an attractive man or nobody would love me, or I'm not confident because I don't have nice clothes, and the nice clothes have things rather than, you know, I'm a slave to it, and directing my words and my value. So somebody can just wear something and doesn't mean that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think everybody, to some extent, puts some value limiter on their clothing, on their appearance. Even if you say, oh, I don't care about clothes, well, okay, cool, then you might go, maybe, but you're still not like wearing an orange tracksuit everywhere you go or church. You still have some level of like, okay, this is perfect here, or I wouldn't want to be out in this. Like, at some level, like, everybody puts some amount of value on everything we have in life.
Yeah,
So where's
I
that?
know, but that's what he's saying. He's not saying that you don't. He's saying you put more value in it than you should.
Yeah, but where's that line?
Well, you would know yourself. If, like I said, if I say I had a Rolex, there's nothing wrong with it. But if I feel like I don't have my Rolex on today, people don't respect me, people don't love me, I'm not a powerful man, then obviously there's something wrong, and there's more to me wearing a Rolex than just having a nice watch.
I agree, but like,
That's
what
the problem.
That's
what about
good.
the point of like, we're in an orange tracksuit, oh, I'm not gonna wear an orange tracksuit out. It's like, we put certain clothing on to certain environments, because that's the social expectation.
Yes.
That area, so what's the difference?
I mean, you can say the same thing about someone's career, but
I do
put
too.
their value in that. So I think it's like that same thing. If they're finding their actual value in God, then they can find,
Yeah.
you know, they can like what they wear,
Yeah,
they
they
can like
can
their
use it
appearance.
healthily, yeah.
Same thing with your career, you can wear your career, like your career, do things.
And so once again, let me bring this back to Romans 14. I don't think these are clear black and white issues in the scripture, like I would see like drunkenness or murder or lying or those sorts of things. But people are going to have a different conscience, and a lot's going to have to do with how they were raised, where they were brought up. I mean, I've met young people that were brought up in Palm Springs where it was the norm, not the exception, for young women to have cosmetic surgery and breast implants. Like if you didn't, you were the odd one. It was like an expectation. And you're just thinking, oh my goodness, what kind of culture is that? But that was that culture. And so you have to be aware. That's why I spent so much time in the book talking about presuppositions and the way they affect us and how we get these ideas. But I think we have to be careful not to just point at those Palm Springians and say, oh, you're just like modern Sodom or Babylon or whatever, and you're all full of pride and vanity and wealth. And it's just like, well, maybe the culture at large, but what about individual people? And they're just kind of caught up in that, and they're trying not to stand out. They're trying to be a part of their community and all of that. And I think we have to be careful not to judge others, but when it comes to us, like you were saying, why? Why do I need my nose done? Why do I need hair plugs? Maybe I do, maybe I don't. But that's what I got to work out between me and Jesus. And it really doesn't matter what any of you all think, because I got to live with it. I got to give an answer for it. And I think we need to be kind to each other who may choose different things. For example, I used to be super opposed to this, what we would call like reassignment or gender corrective surgery, however you want to label it, until I realized there were actually people born middle sex or intersex that had like XXY chromosomes or XXXY. And I was thinking, well, in the past, they would call these hermaphrodites who had male and female biological features. And yeah, it's not a huge part of the population, but with almost 8 billion people on the planet, there's a lot more than you may think. Even if it's less than 1% of the population, that's still a lot of people. And it's not something people are probably going to talk about, right? If they have that going on. And so I think we need to be really careful and sensitive. And who gets to make those decisions? Is it the doctor? Is it the parents? Or should it be that individual that's living in that vehicle? And in those cases, I'm thinking, wow, maybe it's not as black and white as I thought it was. Let me give you another example, surrogacy. Do we have any examples of surrogacy in the Bible?
Mary.
I know, right? Mary is like the ultimate surrogate. And I was totally opposed to surrogacy before I read one of my students' papers, because I just thought, it shows you in my youth, I just had so little empathy. I just thought, well, if you can't naturally have children, maybe God didn't want you to have them. And you need to just get over it. And I'm just thinking, wow, Fred, really? Is that the kind of compassion you have for these couples that want to have maybe their own biological kids and raise them or whatever? And in the student's paper, they talked about this Christian woman who her and her husband had had 4 kids, and they believed that's how many God wanted them to have. But she was one of these women that actually got energized being pregnant. She loved it. She loved the feel. She loved nurturing another life inside of her. I know for some women, it's just a torment and a torture and but for other women, you just see them, they glow and they're happy and they love it. And so she and her husband made her womb available to other couples in their church who weren't able to bring children to term. And they would take a fertilized egg from that couple and then have a doctor put it into her womb, and she would bring it to term for them and then give them their child. And when I read that account, I thought, I can't think of anything much more Christian than that. It's not just laying down your life for another person, it's like laying down your womb or your time for that 9+ months as a gift to another family. It's not out of greed. It's not out of manipulation, exploitation. This was an act of love, a gift of love to people who couldn't do that. And see, this is why I'm so big on the intention. If you're like running a house of surrogates in India or Mexico where rich American women don't have to get stretch lines because they want to keep on their power careers and they're just using these women, absolutely not. It's like womb slavery or womb factory worker. And it's like, no, that's so different from someone who's doing this as love. Yeah, Jewel?
What if the woman who was a surrogate, what if her husband was a surrogate? Like same scenario as the last thing, like,
You can go for one case, how would you?
yeah, like what's the difference there? Cause I agree, like the first one sounds really good, but I don't, the difference between a woman not being able to conceive a child and then not wanting to, like not wanting to carry a child, but still use, like if the surrogate's intentions are still pure.
Well, then I think you could have one person doing something good, even though it's the same situation. One person could be doing something noble and honorable and good, and another could be doing works of the flesh. Yeah. But all I'm asking you to do here is don't just have a knee-jerk reaction when you hear of some new technology or some new thing, because just because it's new doesn't mean it's wrong or evil. But do the research, look at the ramifications, look at the intentions, and in some of these, I think that's the best I can do right now. It's just like, where's my heart? Where's my intentions? What am I hoping to accomplish? Because I realize I don't know the future. I don't know the long-term ramifications of some of these things. I mean, right now, the first test tube babies are like probably in their 40s. And, you know, I would love to do some follow-up studies on their lives. And how was that for you growing up when everyone knew you were created outside the womb? And it's very possible in your lifetime, they have the first artificial womb where they're growing mouse embryos. So it's not in an organic person, they're growing animal life in an artificial womb. No, that was a clone.
Oh, okay.
And we can talk about cloning next. But can you imagine if you could just buy a porta-womb and keep it in your back spare bedroom, and then your wife wouldn't have to have all that downtime and such. You could just go in and visit and check on your baby every day when you got home from work or sports or the mall or whatever.
Oh my gosh, I'm lost power, I'm introverted.
Well, I'm sure you'd have to have backup batteries, but I don't know. It sounds so sci-fi, but once again, just because it's not in the norm doesn't necessarily mean it's evil. Cloning, same thing. I was just thinking, no. But can you imagine the medical benefits of cloning? Part of the problem with organ transplants is that your body is rejecting the organs because they're seeing them as like an invasion of an outside source. And so your white blood cells and stuff are trying to fight off this invader. So people that get organ transplants today basically have to take medication to suppress their immunity, basically having AIDS, the equivalent of AIDS, where they could die from like a cold or a flu or some more mild illness because they're having to so crank down their immune system so their body doesn't reject these donated organs. If you were able to clone your own organs, your body would see it as your own. It would be a direct match. Now, the problem is, even though we have learned how to clone mammals, holy cow. I mean, we've been able to clone frogs and amphibians and stuff for a long time. Let me give you a basic cloning 101 class.
Well, now they can cut out that whole extra process, having to grow a whole thing. They're working right now, they already have part of it in development is 3D lattices through organic material where they can use their own like stem cells
Yes.
and stuff to just grow an organ on basically a biodegradable lattice, and it'll eventually become a fully functioning organ with your DNA, your cell structure. So that's like the future goal.
And that would be so much better. Basically, what Elijah's talking about is you could go in. You could basically go in, let's start simple. We can make ears because we can shape cartilage. And so you could shape cartilage into like an ear shape. And then you could take some of that skin you're growing in your vats, it just kind of floats on the water, and you wrap this ear in your skin. But then to keep it alive, you got to attach it to something where it's going to get blood flow to feed the cells. And I don't know if you ever saw that, I think it was Scientific American. It had a hairless mouse, little pink mouse with a human ear on its back, because they were using this mouse to keep the ear alive until the person was ready. I think that was right here in San Diego. But what great technology if you got mangled or lost an ear or nose. But what Elijah's talking about is way more involved, where they're doing hearts, different organs, and they're making like this scaffolding, and then they add your own DNA to that, and it begins to integrate and grow, almost like those strangler figs will come up and grow around another tree, but it's your DNA covering this structure. And so once again, your body's not going to see it as like a foreign invading force. Well, cloning, it's like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This is how they did Dolly, the sheep. So they took from these sheep teat cells, or from sheep teats, they took a cell, and they took from Dolly one of her eggs, and I don't know how many chromosomes sheep have, but humans, we have 46. So the egg would have 23 chromosomes. And normally in conception, you would then have a sperm, which also has 23 chromosomes. And when these come together, you get 46 chromosomes, and this begins to divide, and again, and again, and again, into new forms of life. So in cloning, what is done is they go in and they remove the DNA material in the nucleus of the egg. And then they take this, let's blow up this cell with the 46 chromosomes, and they insert this into here. And then they give it an electric shock, and it begins to divide. But now, instead of it being a new animal coming part of its genetic material from the father, part from the mother, it's like an identical twin. It's a replication of the sheep that gave this genetic material, because this is the blueprint of this sheep, not of this sheep and that sheep. Questions, comments?
So theoretically, if we were able to do this with the heart and the brain, then people could live forever.
Well, no, because your overall cells have the teleal markers that they believe right now is probably their overall health and life. Like it can replace like damaged parts, or like it can help you live longer for sure. But eventually, your entire cell is like getting weaker and weaker and weaker. Even the DNAs.
But see, if we want to get really sci-fi, and they make great movies about it, I think we have Arnold Schwarzenegger's, is it called The Seventh Day? It's a futuristic cloning movie. The Island's another good one. But the idea is, because we can't just clone yet a heart or a lung or a liver, but we could theoretically clone an entire human. But now we have brand new ethical dilemmas, right? And see, this is part of why I made such a big deal about getting you to define what is a human being, or when does a human being begin? Because if you say a human being begins at conception, this clone, it's not conception. It's just like a growth of another sheep off that teat. Do you see what I'm saying? And what about, do you know how identical twins are formed? So it's one sperm, one egg, like this traditional, but when they come together, they split and they begin to grow into two separate beings. So does that mean there were two souls that were at this point of conception, and that's why that egg split? Or when the egg split, did one soul go into this person and another go into that one? I mean, twin studies are freaky, right? Some twins seem nothing alike, and I'm talking identical twins, and others are just like, they may have been grown up in different families. They end up marrying wives with the same name, naming their children the same. I mean, it's freaky, almost like it's the same person.
They did an experiment with like 5 twins, with identical twins, right? And like they separated them at birth, and they all ended up like kind of messed up for it. Like they're not growing up together, like, you know, from the beginning, and like they were similar, like they had the same haircuts and all that. But you know, one of them ended up killing themselves and all that stuff. So it was just a pretty sad story.
That sounds like a very unethical twin study. Yeah. Hopefully they're not allowing that anymore. But what a great question, and more great sci-fi, right? Are clones people too? Or do clones belong to the person who cloned them? Like if I clone myself, is that clone of me an autonomous individual, or does it belong to me? Is it my property because it's my DNA? See, there are going to be great ethical dilemmas in the future to work with. But if I needed a heart or a kidney, let's do a kidney because we got 2. And I'm like, hey, little mini me, I could really use one of those kidneys. Because without it, I'm going down. And I would hope my clone would be like, sure, you gave me life. I'd love to give you a kidney.
But if he has your DNA, he will be rebellious.
Chances are he'll be just like me, right?
Well, that also is like the interesting part is like in the island, they don't just pop them away like as babies when they grow up. They like grow into their adults in the womb and they teach them everything at that age. They have no memories. So it's like, what? You know,
Right.
like are we just keeping them in tubes?
That seems more ethical, but that was so fun that the island dealt with that dilemma, because they said if we just put them, like kept them hooked up to machines, they wouldn't thrive, they would die.
Yeah.
So we had to actually make them think they were living life. And and surprise, surprise, no, you're just being raised for spare parts.
Well, then how do you know you're not one of them?
Well, that is also in 6th day, they deal with that, and they would tattoo the clones inside their lip. So if you had a tattoo inside your lip, you were a clone. But the interesting thing about the 6th day clone movie was they weren't just cloning you and you were being born a baby, they were like preloading clones, kind of like the scaffolding idea, that then you could superimpose that person's DNA upon the structure. And you would do constant, you know how you like save stuff on your computer And you maybe put some of it onto the cloud that you don't want to lose. Well, people started to do that with their own consciousness every day. So you would have an updated book of like, these are the thoughts and mind of Fred up to this current moment. And so if this Fred died, you would simply get my latest update disk and you would take it down to the clone factory with a sample of my DNA. They would build out the scaffolding and then insert that memory and download it into my brain. So I would wake up in a new vehicle with my last recorded memories. But see, it raises whole questions about what is a human being? Are you just your memories? Are you just your DNA? Is there a soul? Are we just machines? And from a Christian perspective, I think our bodies are really more just our vehicles. Our true selves is that non-material part, and I don't think you can upload that onto the cloud.
But it really does bring up, because I'm staunchly pro-life, but it brings up this really interesting, like, when does life begin? When does real soul-filled, in the image of God, like, start? Because, like, if we make a clone of you and we throw it in a vat, it has, it lives, it doesn't just die, because it can't think, but it has consciousness. Whose soul is it?
Right.
It doesn't have a new soul, but it's actually you.
Right, and you could see the whole like civil rights issues happening with clones, right?
You
Clones,
didn't ask their permission to clone them.
yeah, clones are people too. I think I'd be pro-clone. Knowing me, protect the clones. In some sci-fi, it gets even more specialized, right? Where you make clones to do specific jobs.
Star Wars.
You could have soldier clones. You could have sanitation worker clones. You could have clones that are all pretty much intellect, others that are almost all brawn. And you could just literally breed people like we have different types of horses for different types of work or different types of animals to do different jobs. But this is such a like materialistic, mechanistic view of humans. And I don't like it. I still want God in control, but I also don't want to be one of these anti-science people that says, no, it's not natural. It's not, I mean, just because something's natural doesn't mean it's good. I mean, there's a lot of rough things that happen in nature. And if we can mitigate some of those through the reason and science God has given us, I'm all for that. But once again, it's intention. Why are we doing it? Be careful about judging others about what they're doing.
So then you have the teleological argument side of things. Like, what about all of them? And then, like, we go back, we kind of talked about the vaccine thing. Kelly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, she brought that up, great point. Like, what about that stuff? Because if you look at the vaccines that have single cell lines, they're not the original tissue at all. They haven't been that baby's tissue
Right.
for 30 years. And it's like people, and for me, it's like it's really, really big because I'm sponsored pro-life, but I'm like, if you can, let's use a vaccine that's like a plague, where it's actually killing like half the population of Europe or whatever, a third or whatever it was. Like, if we had to develop the vaccine to start using those lines, like we could save, 10 million lives. Because that deed was done by another person that was an elective abortion. It wasn't like the scientists, hey, we're killing your baby to take this. Like, they killed their baby. They're like, well, we can get some good out of this evil. So like, it's like,
But do you hear as that rolls off your mouth,
no, I hear it. But again,
that's like pure utilitarianism.
That's true. But again, like even, I don't know what a good example. I'm trying to give you an example of, I don't know, but then it's like working all things to good, right? Like that's,
Oh, God, we're all things to good.
exactly, but we're supposed to emulate it, right? I'm just throwing out like ideas how you can reason that out, reason that.
Oh,
like,
you can reason it out 1,000 different ways.
The moral dilemma, because you look at like a lot of our medical advances now came from atrocious stuff like 100, 200 years ago. And it's like, well, we can't go to doctors because it's all based on that basis, and it's the same. It's in my mind, it's very similar. Abusing human life, but it's led to a lot of, I mean, innumerable lives saved because of the evil deeds.
Same with war, right?
So like, how far
Some-
removed do you get from evil deeds where you're like, okay, now we can use this for good? Like, how far do you get? Or is it just tainted? Because if we say it's tainted, we say, oh, using, killing babies or using dead things or anything like that is like evil, and we rule that off the table. Well, if you start going back, we're gonna have to start ruling out a lot of our modern medicine.
Yep.
So it's like,
I hear you. These are really difficult. And that's part of why my admonition is to be gentle with each other, be careful how we're judging, like not condemning other people, but really being clear in our minds, like, why are we doing this? Why are we supportive of this sort of thing? Or why are we resisting this sort of technology? I had with the GMO, the genetically modified foods, part of my problem isn't that we can make super bumper crops, very nutritious. Also, in fact, it's probably likely in the future, your doctor will just prescribe you a certain type of milk, and that's where you'll get your antibodies or the vaccine stuff you need, and they're just simply doing it right through the production of the cows. And you don't have to take shots or pills because they're doing it right from farm to arm in this case. In other cases though, like Monsanto, they have coated their seeds and you have to use their, how does that work? Their seeds are, I believe, are coated in, feel free to correct me if anyone's watching this, I'm gonna look this up when I get home. I believe their seeds are coated with a fertilizer, but it's activated when you use their pesticide. And so they're getting you not only to buy their seeds, but you also need to use their pesticides in order to grow their crops. And because they're genetically modified seeds, they own the copyright to them. And so if you had a cornfield next to a Monsanto cornfield and there was cross-pollination, they could look at, and you saved your corn seed that you did not get from Monsanto, they could do a DNA test of your corn seed, and if it had their DNA genetic markers in it, they could sue you for using their protected copyright material. I cannot believe the US gave genetic copyright claims to people. I don't get it. Well, I do get it. I think it has to do with money, power, control.
8% of corn in the US is owned by Monsanto.
Yeah, read that.
That's crazy. I've never heard of this. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I think there was a Netflix documentary called Food Inc. or Food Incorporation that was quite horrifying. And once again, I don't know if it's bad or not. A lot of this is so new, we don't know if it's perfectly fine or healthy, or if people are gonna be having weird birth defects or anomalies 10, 20 years down the line. I think a lot of it's going to be fine. They're just rearranging different things, different traits. But what I don't like is the control. Like, you have to use our seed, our fertilizer, our pesticide, because it's brilliant, right? They've made their own market within a market. And then they can shut down anyone who happens to get their crops or seeds pollinated or touched by their product.
I mean, there's also the huge benefits of GMOs where it's like, cause there's like the one pesticide you mentioned that caused a bunch of leaks in the groundwater, caused a bunch of birth defects for a long time.
Yeah, DDT.
Yeah, well, they can, I watched that movie last week, it was Veritasium, big science channel, and it was like going over how they can like find a plant's natural protector and like make a specific part of that genome that doesn't hurt humans at all, but is poisonous to that specific insect. So you don't even have to use dangerous chemically pesticides. You can just make it, if they plant it out
Right.
But it doesn't affect humans, it tracks the different DNA,
Yeah.
and it's a normal form for us. or whatnot.
Yeah, I'd be a lot happier with that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, like, how they can do this, and I'm just like,
And some things seem pretty innocuous, right? Like they've been able to develop strawberry plants that aren't affected by frost. Because normally strawberries have to grow in temperate areas where there's no freezing. Well, how cool to get a frost-resistant strawberry. But what if that gets carried over into other plants?
Yeah.
That the only thing keeping your region from being overrun is the cold weather. And now you get encroachment of all these frost-resistant plants that we didn't make, but because of cross-pollination, other transfers, now we've unleashed something. And so that's the fear. But I don't want us to live in fear, but I also want us to walk in wisdom. And I think we're out of time, but send me dilemmas. If not, the next ones I'm probably going to do are like euthanasia, because that was almost unheard of when I started teaching ethics, except in ethics class. And now it's legal in California. I just did my living will, and one of the questions the paralegal was asking me was like, oh, this box tells us how you would like to die. And I was like, what are you talking about? I thought my will was for after I died. They're like, oh, well, now in California, you can choose if you want to die and when. And I was like, yeah, okay. We're going to talk about this in my ethics class. All right. It's rough, though. So if you have some happier ethical dilemmas you want to talk to about first, I'd just be content with that. All right. Have a good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us.